Hey kids, welcome to Stylus Rumble Harmony Effects Guide thing. So last night I did my live stream, and the reason it's not up today is because I was listening to music while I was recording. So YouTube was just like, we're not having any of this. This is flagged for everyone, for everywhere. So in the future streams, I think I'm just going to do no music because I didn't realize how many people were actually watching it the next day. So my future streams will have no music. This episode, I'm going to go over a couple of the useful tips that I went over last night so you guys can get it. So sorry for you guys who have to hear it twice, but I did go a little bit more in depth with this thing that we went over last night, so I'll get to that in a minute. Next week, I'm going to try and do the live stream again at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and if you guys want to come, I'll start off just doing doodles and stuff for things for my short film, but if you guys have any questions and stuff, I'm glad to go over it, and then I may or may not turn it into a longer video if it's something that needs a little bit more in depth. But quick questions about Toon Boom or whatever, drawing, art, anything like that, pop by, ask your question, and I'll be happy to share my knowledges with you. I figure, like, after I'm done with this thing, I'm just going to pop it up on Gumroad for you guys. So if you want to see how this is actually put together, all the different pieces, just pop over to Gumroad and it'll be there for free for download. If you want to leave a donation, feel free. I'm certainly not going to tell you not to. But this is there for you guys if you want to play with it in Harmony 14 Premium Edition. I'm not sure, as usual, if it'll work in previous editions. As long as it's one of the versions that has particles, I think it should work. Let's get going. So the first thing I'm going to go over is just a quick overview of setting up a lighting module kit. So all this stuff I go over in episode number 16 and 17 in my rigging tutorial series. So those are all numbered because they should be watched in order. Ideally, you'll get a lot more out of it if you do that. But 16 and 17 have stuff like this involving lights and setting up simple setups like that. What I'm going to do is use an apply peg transformation, and it's just like a top peg on the bottom. That's basically all this is. So when I move this, it's got another version of the guy that I can move from this peg over here. So it's like a peg override almost. So by using this as a cutter, so I'm putting that in this one, and then I'm going to put a version of the same ball here in the poop port, the one with the little dot. So by doing that, let me unplug this guy, I can use it as a cutter. So here I can put a little rim like that, or I can invert my cutter, and now I'm cutting off an edge like that. So it's just using it as a cutter for itself, basically. Now, the reasoning behind this is because I can use a color scale, a color override glow, any sort of module kit. I can throw that behind now, and I can make that a little bit, well, that one would have to be the brighter one. So we can dim this down a little bit. We'll switch it over to this guy. Right, and now I've got myself a little bit of a shadow. And this is a gradient, so, I mean, it doesn't really need this, but we can throw a blur here, and we can fade that off a little bit if it's too much. So that's a cheap way of throwing an effect on something. And now I can animate my light like this. I can use a color scale on this one. So if I need my value to be brighter and say redder, because you can put this on an entire character rig. So now it's got a red highlight and it's got the shadow. We can think about if we have a red highlight, our shadow is going to be a little bit greener probably. It's nice to use complementary colors in your shadows. So if he walks into a place he needs that, you can set something up like that. Or you could even put some sort of like a little bounce light on your thing. All sorts of stuff. But it's basically you give yourself a means of having different lighting on your character just by using this apply peg transformation. You can also use this with a quad map, which I also go over in the other video. And so you can, instead of using this as a cutter, cut all this stuff out, put him in the back. So now we can throw this guy on the ground like this, and we can put a shadow module on there. There we go. So now we can put a little ground shadow here using that apply peg transformation and the quad map. So all that stuff I go over in detail in that other video. The next thing we went over, the real meat of it, what I want to do now today, I wanted that ball. Beep. Beep, 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 beep. Our lovely regular dimensional whale asked me to kind of burn something away. So I want to play with that a little bit today and kind of boost it up, see what we can do, get some sparks. So we're going to call this cutter. So it's important that you name all your pieces when you're doing complex setups, just so you don't get yourself all tangled up. So on my cutter, I'm going to create a green screen cutter. Boop. I'm going to do something like this shape. I may actually animate this going around a little bit. Get some perspective. I'm going to throw in a deformer make it an envelope deformer. And I'll just put some deformer down here so that this part isn't getting manipulated by the top part here. Doop. Oh, here's frame 1. Then in the next one, I want it to round out as it goes towards the top of my dealie here. So now as we animate it, it's going to get some of that fake perspective. So it's going to wrap around the ball a little bit. It's going a little bit too fast. So we slow it down a little bit. So we want it to be about horizontal here. We'll put another key in here so I can control when it's horizontal. So now my ball is disappearing. Like that. So that's step 1 of this, like, burning from the bottom up. So there's tons of stuff we could do now to make this look a little bit more like it's actually burning. I can actually put a layer over here, so burn, and we can have some sort of a sparkle effect, something like sparks or sparking. Just go ahead and make it a little bit random and jagged, and we'll see what this looks like. I think we're going to need glow on this one because we want it to be really, use a source color. I want it to look really fiery. So this is kind of cute. It's kind of got a blue glow on the go. So instead of using the source color, I'm going to give it more of a gold, like a yellow red. And so you can either animate something by hand like this, that's just a little bit crazy, or you could just use a line. Put a deformer on it. I'm thinking this will look kind of cool. You can't see a lot of the variation in there. So let me try being a little bit more blatant about my weird shapes. See, that's kind of cool. I'm getting some little almost flares. So we could even make this an actual flare. So this is the onion skin on. It looks really blown out because it's got that effect on it. So you could animate it without the effect, and then you'll be able to see it a little better. When you really heavily composite stuff, you can get away with a lot less fine-tuned work on something like this. So once you throw all that blur and stuff on, it looks fine. So the good thing about using that deformer cutter is you could play with the timing ahead of time so that you know exactly what you're going to get. And you could write stuff in there. Hello, heart. Don't write nasty stuff. Don't pull a Maya the Bee. Drawing nasty things in your drawings. So now if we look at any of these independently, even our hello we wrote there, you can't see it. Actually looks a little bit less asymmetrical than some of our other ones. You want to make sure you fill in. So maybe I'll just go along and make sure that the seam is hidden, that we don't get any sharply cut off blue stuff. Okay, so let's grab our just basic particles, and we'll go in. We're just going to grab a gravity one. I think that's a good place to start. Most of the stuff's set up. And here on our sprite emitter, we're going to, bloop, bloop. Instead of a 3D region, we're going to use an image. So we can just use this 3D image as like an image holder. And we could actually copy our burn and then paste it in here. So now the burn thing that we've gone to the trouble of designing so eloquently is now going to be emitting these particles. And then it's just a matter of deciding what kind of particles we want. So to start, if it's going to be an ash is very light, and it's not going to drop like that. It's going to have a little bit of a delicate fall. So let's turn our gravity down a little bit. We're just going to have a little tiny bit of gravity. So it's a little bit too slow, but that's because we don't have any velocity in here. So I'm going to use an interpolated speed. And so we can play around with our gravity here if we want our ash to blow off to the side. That's kind of cool. I think we're gonna have to bring this down a little bit. So even though we're using an image, we can use this peg port here to move our image down because our guys are coming up a little bit too high. And you can animate it as time goes on. So I'm just gonna have it come down a little bit towards the end there so none of our particles are getting blasted off into space. I think that feels a little bit better. This is a little bit too much, I think. That's not enough. So sometimes particles can feel a little bit like guess and check, and in a way it is. And here I'm getting a weird clump of particles between here and here. So if you watch that area, I'm going to turn the trigger off on this guy. So, bloop. Here's the trigger. So there he's emitting particles, and here I can tell it to stop so it doesn't shoot out that last weird one. There's still some crazy ones coming out from over here. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. The velocity, I've put an interpolated speed so I can turn some of the speed way down and turn some speed up. There you go. I like that more. I feel like they're still going too fast, so I'm going to make sure that... And I want a little bit... One thing that I find the Harmony Mod particles don't do very well is random movement. You can include a random, but I feel like it doesn't really do anything. So I'm going to try throwing in an orbit here. And things are getting super hysterical immediately. So we want this to be very small. Things are kind of getting trapped. So we've got a few little crazies, but this is working a little bit better. You can include a region here. That's what this port is for. So right now we've got the sync on the go. I can use that same region as well for the orbit. And things are going to rotate around inside of that shape. And I still feel like they're too heavy. So when I play it, it doesn't feel like ash, just because it is still falling pretty substantially. So let's just turn our magnitude down on this thing. Bring that down by half, bring that down by half. So our gravity's going about half as much. We still have a couple little crazy flyaways, but it's starting to feel a little bit more ashy. So we can also bring down our velocity here a little bit more. So none of our particles are getting shot out too quickly. Feels a little bit better. Our orbit might be too much now. I don't feel like the orbit's adding enough stuff. I'm just going to take it out. That feels a little bit better. Alright, so now what we got to do is take these dots, all these just little snowflakes here, and we got to turn them into something cool. Alright, so let's create some stuff to put in there. So I'm going to just turn this into ash, and I'm going to create a couple little pieces so there's a little bit of variety, a couple different types of gray here, and then I can create some variation in shapes, some big ones, small ones. Turn on my grid so that I can see where I'm putting them, and then I'm just going to create little shapes. I want them to be kind of just little weird gray shapes and use all the different colors. Do some boring ones that are just circles, and just do one big one like this. I'm going to take my ash here, and I'm going to replace this drawing in here, my sprite emitter, my image sprite. I'm going to turn that in there, use my particle type, make sure that all my particles are starting at frame 1, and it goes as far as frame 7. So in my sprite emitter, at the generation tab in my type, this is where I'm going to put between 1 and 7 is where I've put my different shapes. And now we can check out size. So these are pretty big. I'll go back into my drawing, reposition all drawings, and I'll just shrink them down a little bit. Now we've got our ash, and I'm going to throw a blur module on here. How do I feel about that? Maybe I'm going to... Don't like that it's super blurry, but I don't want them to be... I don't want to deal with motion blur right now. And put blur over the top. Yeah, that looks a little better. If I put a blur on top and bottom, they kind of look a little bit smudgy. I don't like that. I want there to be more, because I feel like this ball has a lot of mass to it. So I'm just going to create a lot more sprites. And we can change our background so it's not gray on gray on gray. Alright, it's not really aesthetic, but let's render it out and see what we got so far. Alright, so I feel like it's bursting out a little bit to the sides too much. Like this side, I don't want it to be coming out as much. That's the velocity's fault. And I'd almost... I mean, I could have it blur more as the time goes on if I wanted to go into the rendering blur. And of course, the particles should be in the back. Let's re-render that. So before I re-render it, what I'm going to do is put in some compositing here. I'm going to put an overlay gradient, because this thing should be really bursting with light. I really want it to be just stupid impressive. So we're going to put a radial gradient. And this is a pretty low-tech way of getting some cool blur. Just make sure your edges are out. So it starts here, and the glow ends here, and big in the middle. Now let's re-render it again. Alright, that's not too bad. I feel like there's still, you can really beef up this this guy here, this overlay thing, Let me just throw glow on it and see how it reacts. This might be a little bit too much. If you do this, it's not too bad. And one more thing I want to add while we're in here. I'm going to grab another sprite emitter, and we can use the same region, and all this stuff we can keep. But this one, I'm going to put in much fewer. No, I am going to need a second one. Boop, sprite emitter. So we can use all of these guys again, the gravity, the particles and stuff. If we want it to follow along the same trajectory as this other guy, we just need our sprite emitter to come out of a different port because I want to render it a little bit differently. So I'm going to put different render modules on it. And what I'm going to do is put an animated spark. I think that would be cool. I'll use a different color in case I don't like it. I'm going to animate it just getting big and then small again. And the first one I think I'll... So this has 17 frames. Grab my dude, bring him back in my emitter, put him in here. And so now we're going to, instead of use particle type, we're going to use the age. And then we don't want it to cycle, we just want it to happen once. So that's fine. And we want this one to be in the front because our sparks are gonna... There we go. So there's our rendering nicely. They're huge. They're absolutely massive. So let's bring them down. That's one thing I've never gotten the hang of, is trying to figure out how big my particles are going to be. I always have to guess and check. So, and then we can throw glows on there. I think my ash is a little bit too light. I think I wanted to make it darker overall. That's alright. Maybe it needs to be blurred more. I really should have looked up reference for ash. So I'm just going through and being a little bit picky about where my emitter is actually emitting from. Sometimes they're getting a little bit too high, too fast. Just being a little bit snobbish about it. And if you're really opposed to some of these wayward guys, you could always put a cutter in above. Like you can really just cut out any of these guys that you don't like if you're feeling really picky. But I feel like if you're going the particle route, you got to kind of be willing to live with some of the chaos. All right, so this is not too bad. I like the sparks matched in with the fire. I think there could definitely be some more burst explosion-y type stuff with these sparks. And I mean, you could play the fire up a million different ways. It's endless how much different stuff you could do with this sort of thing. It's just about your imagination. Looking up reference is probably smart. You could play around with the blur over time so that it gets more blurry or less blurry. The way the ash could fall on the ground with a bounce. Lots of different stuff. If you're completely lost on the whole particle thing, I do have a 4-part series in my effects playlist that you could go through, and I go over every single menu that I could think to go over with these guys and try and help you guys get a little bit more adept at it. But I just wanted to play with this idea that Dimensional Oil came up with. I think it was a fun thing to do. You can also put in two different blurs, so one's a little bit more blurry, one's a little less blurry. But a lot of times it really is guess and check. Oh, I think that. Like it. So I feel like the sparks could have a lot more outward bursts. There's some stuff we could play with that. We could also throw in a number of different sparks, because right now they're kind of lasting about the same time and they're ending about the same time, but we could have a few that run longer. We could throw in as many different, you can layer these really substantially. I also feel like there should be like a... So obviously you want to think about what it is that makes your ball disappear like this. If it's magic, if someone comes along with a magic wand and just a disintegrate spell, then, I mean, you could make it look like whatever you want. But if it's actually sitting in a fire, or it's something that, it's one of those like held cartoony actions where it's kind of like the guy catches fire and then he's made of soot and then he just blows away. You could do everything without the sparks and just kind of have an ash that falls away, and you could throw in the bounce plane on the bottom and get the sparks to kind of stay around on the ground or something. If you want it to be really specific, like one of the old Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons, I'd recommend drawing it frame by frame. It's not super fun to draw a million frames of dust like this, but you are going to get exactly what you want. It's going to look really perfect. You could also do the hand-drawn stuff for most of it and then put a layer on top of some like light dusting of stuff that blows away. So the heavy soot falls, and then you can overlay it with some more pretty dust like this, and it'll kind of distract from any of the bad drawings that you put in there if you're rushing. But hopefully this gives you some ideas for stuff you can do on your own. I just thought this was like such a fun thing. I had to go give it a try. I can open up my particle system here if you guys want to take a look. So the ash is a double blur, more blurred and less blurred layered on top of one another to get that look. The sparks, I'm using a glow with the source color selected, and I'm also using the full strength one behind. So here if I unplug this, you can see it just gives it a little bit more punch when that's behind, a little bit of sharpness. And then the burn is just using a glow. It's not using the source color, but it's still using this sort of golden light here. So I wanted the outline, this burn outline, to be a little bit golden because it was giving me a blue one with the source color. And then just a cutter on the ball. That's nothing fancy. Maybe I'll pop this up on Gumroad for you guys so you can take it and play with it. I think that'd be fun. I'll go and name everything. I'll name everything. I'll pop it up on Gumroad. The only thing is, remember, anything like this that you're going to set up, if you put it on a different color background, it's going to look a little bit different, but I mean, it should still work pretty well. Whatever your background is, I recommend working on that color when you're setting stuff like this up. Otherwise, you might get a surprise. You never want to be surprised once you throw in the background you're using. Alright, so that's it for today. Thanks for dropping by. Like, share, subscribe, all those things internet people ask you to do, and I will see you in the next video.